All right, inequality. What do we got here?
Okay, so some new numbers that are pretty stunning. For the first time ever, let's go ahead and throw this tweet up on the screen from fantastic economist Gabriel Zuckman. He says America's middle class now holds a smaller share of wealth than the top 1%. The middle 60% by income saw its wealth share drop to 26.6% of national wealth. That is the lowest level on record. So this is the first time ever that you have the middle class so celebrated in America. That's what America's all about, is this strong and vibrant middle class, with the idea that anybody who plays by the rules, who works hard, can make it into that middle class, now has less wealth. 60% of the country, okay? The middle 60% has less wealth than the top 1% of Americans. This is an incredibly dire sign of where the economy is headed. And every single crisis, whether it was the financial crisis, whether it was COVID, every single one of them just serves to transfer more and more wealth to the very tippy top. So when you think about why politics have been so wild and you see these big swings back and forth and people feeling so despondent about the future of the country, these are the type of numbers that really tell the tale of what's going on in this nation and why people feel that sense of decline, feel that sense of despair. While you see things like, suicides up and addiction and all of these indications that things are not going well in this country, numbers like this help to explain that larger picture.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I went and you can actually go and you can pull the data, which is that the middle 60% of the U.S. households saw their combined assets drop to 26.6% of that national wealth, while the super rich had that 27. So that first kind of changeover. But what's really remarkable to me is that there are 77.5 million families in the middle of 60% that make between $27,000 to $141,000 annually. Now, look, I would not consider 27,000 middle class whatsoever, so I don't exactly know if that's the correct one, but that's what the Census Bureau in the United States says, maybe in like Tempe, Arizona or something like that. We're a very low cost of living. But what you can see is that the concentration of the wealth in such a fraction of the population is really one of the cores of the country's political battles. I mean, think about the SALT tax. Like, what are the people willing in D.C. to go to absolute war for? Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Josh Geitheimer. The SALT deduction. And what have we shown you here? The SALT cap deduction, yes, some people who are middle class, and I say middle with some real asterisks here because we're talking the $200,000 to $300,000 income range. I'm not saying that makes you rich, but it definitely doesn't make you poor. Yeah, you're going to get some modest benefit from that. But here's the deal. It's overwhelmingly for the people who make over $1 million a year in income, which is less than like 500,000 households in America. And we're comparing those priorities, those people, to 77.5 million. And you actually pointed out this story. This is starting to manifest in all sorts of really weird ways. Yeah. Put the story up there on the screen. We have now millennials teaming up to fulfill the dream of home ownership. So people who are burdened by debt, house prices, they are pooling their finances with partners and friends and roommates in order to buy houses. So think about that. They're basically entering a roommate situation in order to just buy a house, and not even really buy a house, to own a fraction of a house. And of course, that's really weird. I mean, what if somebody wants to move? Then what are they going to sell? Their part of their equity? It doesn't really make any sense.
It's complicated.
Yes, you're building up some equity in the house, and God bless you, and I fully support that in terms of what that means for what you might be able to pass down. But shouldn't people be able to afford their own house if they want to? I mean, it's totally crazy.
Well, and if you read the story, they painted like fun new trend of millennials buying houses with their best friends, as if this is just like a new choice that's being made. Maybe for some people, sure.
Right.
But for most, and this is what we see underlying a lot of the trends of different ways millennials are approaching their lives, whether it's when they're getting married and how many kids they're having, or whether they're buying a house with their friend instead of on their own or with a significant other. It has a lot more to do with economic necessity than it does like wacky new trend that these millennials are into. And by the way, like millennials aren't young anymore.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm technically a millennial and I'm pushing 40. Like the oldest millennials are 40 and the youngest ones are pushing 30.
Yeah,
okay?
that's right.
So
I'm going to be 30 next year.
so you're just like, this is a group of people who, an entire generation that's just been hit with crisis after crisis after crisis, has had no opportunity to really build wealth, is being wildly priced out of the housing market, which is, of course, the number one way that Americans are able to build wealth and able to achieve that sort of like comfort and stability of a true middle class life. And they're not able to do it. Here's the data that backs it up. Since 2014, when millennials became the largest share of home buyers in the US, the number of home and condo sales across the country by co-buyers has soared. Number of co-buyers with different last names increased by 771%. Between 2014 and 2021, that's according to data from a real estate analytics firm. So, this is a massive changing situation. We've, of course, covered here the way that housing prices have completely skyrocketed. There are a lot of complicated reasons for that. One of that is permanent capital getting in the game and wanting to be America's landlord and driving prices up even more and making them even more unaffordable. But that inability to buy a home, I wish there were more paths to wealth creation for Americans, but that has been the traditional path. And it is increasingly out of reach for millennials. And I don't think Gen Z is going to be in much of a better place.
Oh, absolutely not. I covered yesterday, I wish you'd been here, for a monologue on men in America. And there's this new report from Pew Research, which actually shows that there's an increased share of our population of single males, and that actually has had a precipitous drop amongst that group, 30% actually, in their terms of their real wages from the year 1990. And the way that drops contributes to all sorts of bad outcomes in terms of how they actually live less long, or they have worse health outcomes. That leads to lower wages, less college attainment, living with your parents longer, all sorts of bad societal things, drug use, almost everything is completely all the way up whenever you look at it. And it's part of the same thing. And actually, I got a tremendous amount of feedback. I really didn't even expect it in terms of this. And a lot of people were like, what chance do I got? I got paid 50-something% of my income in rent. I can't afford college. I got credit card debt, and I work a job that pays me $11.25 an hour or something like that. I don't have an answer. I mean, what do you do? If you're in that situation, you're like 26, 27 years old. I mean, how are you even supposed to take time off in order to try and go to some sort of school? That requires debt. What if you're already been financed? And that's the situation for a lot of people. It was interesting. People are so conditioned to the terrible way that we have finances in the country, that when they have a modest increase, they're like, it's great. So I recently saw that a majority of Americans say that their personal finances are in excellent shape. And I was like, what? How is that even possible? Because I know that 40-something% of the country is a blown tire away from bankruptcy, a single emergency away from total bankruptcy and having to live paycheck to paycheck. Well, it turns out that now it's like they've got a little bit of savings. So people are so conditioned to having nothing that they say that they're in excellent financial shape if they have somewhere between $200 to $1,000 in savings. What is that going to do for you?
Wow.
If you have a real healthcare crisis, or if you need to buy, what if your car breaks down? Try buying a car right now in terms of the used car market. All the basic necessities of life. And I just thought that, and I was really struck by how even just having like a couple $100s, people are so conditioned to having nothing that even just having that just means the world to a lot of people. But it shouldn't be that way, especially whenever you're looking at how much so many people have made in the middle of the pandemic in particular.
This idea of back to normal is kind of like a deep concept that you could really dig into. Like, what does that actually mean? Does it mean, is back to normal like back to my only prayer of buying a house is with 5 of my friends? Or is back to normal like, a time when you could actually aspire as, a young person to buy a house and have a family and afford to go on vacation now and again and those sorts of things. And I don't want to glorify the past. Like, there have obviously been a lot of issues, especially in terms of race and gender and all of those things. And we've made progress there. Not nearly enough progress there, but some progress there. But there's no doubt that when you look at these numbers, these are the worst numbers. We're worse now than the Gilded Age. Worse than the Gilded Age. The vaunted American middle class, this is what it's supposed to be all about. This is what makes us so great, right? This is the driving force, why capitalism is awesome and all of those things, is now collapsing and really has been for decades. I mean, wages have been stagnant since the 80s, effectively. workers are getting like the tiniest little bit of a wage now and everybody's melting down, freaking out over it, you know? So it's a bad situation. I think it ties back to Biden, where he's at, and our political situation, because it's just this sense of you can't just tinker around the edges. You can't just, you know, have a sort of like a managerial approach where you're just kind of managing the ship and you're not really changing anything, because things have gone off the rails enough that you need a more transformational approach.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.